You ready?
Yes.
Okay, and action.
Welcome back to Tuesday Talks with Red, episode 14. That says 1-4. Where I've titled this one, Shame on You. And when this idea originally came, like the second it came, I needed to talk about this. And then when I actually started writing it out and deciding where we were going to go with it, what keeps coming to my mind, and like, this is going to be a tell-all on me. It's fine. I'm fine. I'm comfortable with who I am. Is all I can hear every time I say that word or write that word is the shame bell on Game of Thrones. It's like, shame. Like, that's just what I hear. So, judge me if you must, but, I don't care. But there is such a weight that comes with that word. Even if I don't feel shame right now, if someone, like, if I say shame, I just, shame. Like, say it with me, shame. Like, you just feel the weight of that. And especially if someone were to say to me, shame on you, like, shame on you, when we're scolding children and they make unwise choices, or, it's like, shame on you, like, or even the dogs, like, shame. Like, it is such a weighty word. It is so full. It is a full word. And so as I was getting ready for this episode, I reached out to my women and I just said, hey, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when I say the word shame? And it was on text, so you didn't have to feel it as heavy. But if they said it in their brain, then they felt it heavy too. But and the responses that I got back were isolation was one with the word shame, hate, and inflicted. Now, I know my women's stories, my friends' stories, and so I know what they said that brought about those words. But that made perfect sense, because shame does cause us to feel like we need to stay in isolation because we don't want anyone to know. And if I can keep it in the dark and maybe no one knows about it or whatever, and we've talked about that before already. And hate, like, it causes us to hate ourselves. If someone else has done something horrific and shameful, we have a tendency to possibly hate or dislike them because of their choices. But inflicted. So sometimes we inflict shame on ourselves. Sometimes outside parties, our families that we grew up with, or people that, we've lived with or walked through life with, will inflict shame upon us. I talked about that in my divorce episode, where people just tried to inflict shame on me. Boy, you don't know what's going on. Like, you don't have the right to do that. Just move on about the country. So I thought those were three very good. They have no clue. When I asked them, they have no clue where I'm going with this. They had no clue other than that they knew it was for a Tuesday Talks episode. So I think we've all felt shame and or guilt at some point in our lives. I mean, we just have. None of us are perfect. And if you think you are, move on, because it's not true. That's a lie. That's a lie. So I wanted to pause for a second and talk about the difference between guilt and shame, because they are two very different things. Okay? So guilt is adaptive and helpful because it's something that we're holding against our values. Whatever our values are, we will feel guilty for something that we do that goes against those values. Okay? Whether you're in the believer parking lot or not, guilt happens. Even if I'm in everyday life, I can feel, maybe I wish I'd spent some more time with my child who is now away at college. I wish I hadn't wasted the time being angry at my friend because now they're moved to another country. There's lots of other reasons for us to feel guilt, okay? And so all that is something that comes up against our core set of values. That's a good thing. That is a good thing because it is helpful, it is adaptive, it causes us to course correct. Okay? We have enough of those coming at us. If we're wise, and especially if we're in therapy, we can use those to go, you know what? Why does this keep coming at me? And go, okay, let's figure out what the core of this is and let's course correct and stop where I don't have to feel guilt for something. If it's the situation where my child has now gone off to college or gone off to the military, which is going to happen to both of my kids, and and I feel like I didn't invest in enough time with them while they were here and now they're gone. Well, guess what? I'm going to make sure that their time when they're here is not going to be me saying, clean up all the luggage you just exploded in your bedroom. I'm not going to care about that. I'm going to invest in that time. So it's course correct. It's adaptive. It's helpful. Guilt is helpful. Now, when we start sitting in that guilt and never making the choice to get out of it or to course correct, that's a whole nother problem. Right now, I'm just talking about the line between guilt and shame. Shame is defined as the feeling that I'm flawed or unworthy of love, belonging, or connection. That's a whole different ball of wax than guilt. Okay? So that's why shame sits so heavy, because it warps the thoughts and feelings of whatever just happened into, I am unworthy of love, I am unworthy of belonging to whatever, and I am unworthy of connection, which, period, full stop, not true. But when we're sitting in that, there's nothing that can convince us otherwise if we struggle with shame. It can and has and does skew from whatever point that shame comes in to sit on us forward. Unless and until we are willing to handle what needs to be handled where shame is concerned. Okay? The forward will never change if we choose to sit in our shame. Okay? And I'm not saying there's not a time for shame. Like I talked about, with scolding children sometime. We got to choose our words a little carefully. But ultimately, sometimes we are shaming them for something. We shouldn't, but we do. So let's take an opportunity to rectify that so that they're moving forward out of shame. Like, I have failed miserably as a mother at times, but I'm working on making sure this is a home where they feel like they can fail and not be destroyed because of it. I have failed miserably at that before. I am working diligently to not let that be their future. So that's a whole little off free subject I tossed out there. All this is free. What am I talking about? But shame is a whole different ball of wax, okay? We are never, ever, ever meant to bear the weight of extended shame. We're not. It is dangerous. It is hurtful. It is hurtful to our psyche. It is hurtful to our emotion. It is hurtful to our future. And we're not meant to sit in it and stay in it. If it comes into our life, whether it's inflicted, whether it's something we hear, we feel, and we feel like we need to stay inside of it, we've got to find a way to move out of it, or our future is forever changed because of it. Okay? This was very interesting. Everybody has probably heard 1,000 times about Brene Brown, and she has dedicated her entire life to breaking the stigma on shame and dealing with shame. And this is how she defined the difference between shame and guilt. So guilt is something I did bad. Shame is I am bad. You see that different? Like, those are two very different things. Guilt comes from something that I did bad. Shame tells me I am bad. Okay? And we got to flip that script. We have got to flip that script on shame. I have had my own bouts with shame. I've watched my children struggle against shame, loved ones struggle against shame. We have got to flip that script on shame. We've got to silence shame and get to the root of why we're even feeling shame at all. So how do we silence shame? First, we have to get to the root of understanding that shame pulls its power from silence. Period. Whether it's, I've got an addiction to pornography. Okay? If I have an addiction to pornography, I'm probably not telling the world. Like if it's the constant pull on my life and I'm trying to find a way to get away from people so that I can do this in hiding, I'm not telling everybody. If that's shameful, that's something we're sitting in shameful. If I am lying and manipulating and doing things that I know as I'm doing them, I shouldn't be doing them, I'm not going to tell people. I'm going to keep it right here, but I'm also going to sit in shame because of it. So shame derives its power from silence. So speaking, finding a person, an accountability partner, someone I can open up my mouth and talk about whatever is causing me shame. Even if it's something that was inflicted upon me in childhood, I need to talk to someone. I need to open up my mouth and talk to someone about it and breaks that first hold that shame has, because it sits, as long as it can sit in silence, it gains power. Period. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you believe. It gains power. I think what we also have to do, and what I've had to do in the past, is really truly begin to untangle shame from guilt. Because I can see early on in my early path of trying to unpack all my junk, early 20s, mid 20s, those two were too entwined. And I had to really learn to pick apart what is really guilt and things that I need to course correct for versus what is shame that is telling me lies. Because if we remember what Brene said a minute ago, shame says that I am bad. That's not true. I mean, unless we're talking to like mass murderers, but still, I mean, they can course correct. That can happen. It's seen it happen. But I don't want to go down that path. I untangle those two. Figure out what's guilt versus what's shame and deal with them both the way they need to be dealt with. Okay? Start to recognize triggers. Start to recognize what those, once we unpack all this and start really pulling those strings apart, guilt versus shame, start to recognize what triggers shame, that feeling of shame, that what's triggering, what's the words, who are the people. If it is a group of people or a certain person that the second you walk in the room, you instantly feel shame, let's start working on those boundaries. Let's go all the way back to, I think that was like episode 3 or 4. Let's start working on boundaries. Okay? If it's something that I walk into a room and I instantly feel shamed, set up a boundary, figure out what's going on, and let's make that gate work for us and not against us. Okay? Connect, like once we get that accountability partner to kind of help us uncover shame and start pulling it back, like find a group to stay connected in, and find a group that builds you up, that there's no way, shape, or form I'm going to ever walk in with them and feel that constant doom of shame, like that build me up, that help me to dig in and find the good parts of me, the true parts of me that combat I'm just a bad person or I'm just a whore. Let's find those people and we connect with them. Okay. I talked about this in the gaslighting episode, but it applies here as well. Find a truth. Find a truth about myself. I've done this more than I ever cared to count. Find a truth about myself that I know there is no way anybody can take it from me, and let it butt up against that shame. Let it start to butt up against that shame. If my shame is telling me I am bad XYZ because of XYZ, how does that butt up against my truth that I've defined for myself? Okay? 9 times out of 10, our truth is going to be a positive. And so if my shame says I am bad, but my truth says this, and I know this when I'm in a decent frame of mind, what does that do to shame? Right? At the end of the day, we all have worth. We all have worth. Like I talked about it in the worth episode last week, we've got to stop comparing ourselves to each other. Plain and simple. Those of us in the believer parking lot, we have a plumb line to compare ourselves to. Even if we're not, though, we are here for ourselves. Like we don't need to be looking at the person next to us and going, how can I be like them? And why can't I have what they have? No, we all have worth in our own right. I don't care. Every living, breathing being has worth. A lot of times our circumstances throughout life, though, have just really tried to kind of snuff that light out and tell us we don't. But we do, and you do. And you are loved by somebody, somewhere. So, let's start trying to break the silence that is holding its power, or shame that is holding its power in silence. So let's break that silence. Let's start talking. Let's start talking about these hard topics that our generations before us have just taught us we just don't talk about because it was unheard of. Let's not anymore. Gone are those days. Let's open it up. Let's start talking about it, and let's break that power that shame tries to sit on. Like it just sit, like your shoulders just slump down. Let's break it. Okay? We'll do it together. All right. So next week's might gonna get me in a little bit of trouble. Next week and the following week I might lose a lot of followers, but you know what? That's okay. That's not what I'm here for, right? But because I'm just here to tell my truth and my life. And next week is called Evangelical Trauma. That will be fun. More loosely titled Church Hurt. So come back next week. We'll dive into that, whether you're a believer or not. 9 times out of 10, a lot of people that aren't believers will probably resonate with some of this. And 9 times out of 10, if you've been believers for a while, you probably resonate with some other aspects of it. So come back. We'll dive into church hurt, or what I fondly call evangelical trauma. And we will see you then. Have a good week. I'll touch Henry. Henry's moving about the country and now he's hiding. Poor Henry.
Poor Henry.
Poor Henry.
Okay.